The hospital room felt cold that Tuesday morning. 7-year-old Lucy sat on the examination table, swinging her legs back and forth while clutching her favorite stuffed bear. She had named it Captain, after the royal guards she loved watching on television. Her parents, Anne and Robert, stood beside her, trying their best to smile even though their hearts were breaking. Dr. Morrison walked in with a folder full of test results. He was a kind man with gray hair and gentle eyes, but today his expression was serious. He pulled up a chair and sat down so he could look directly at Lucy. That's when Anne knew something was terribly wrong. Doctors don't sit down to give good news. The words came slowly and carefully. Lucy had a rare blood disorder. It was serious. Treatment would start immediately. Anne felt the room spin around her. Robert reached for her hand and squeezed it tight. Lucy didn't fully understand what the doctor was saying, but she could see the fear in her mother's eyes. Over the next few days, their lives changed completely. The bright, cheerful flat they called home became a place of hushed conversations and worried looks. Lucy's favorite pink bedroom suddenly felt too far away as she spent more time at the hospital than anywhere else. The hallways smelled of antiseptic. The walls were painted in cheerful colors that tried too hard to hide the sadness within. Lucy had always been different from other children in one special way. While her classmates collected dolls or footballs, she collected everything about the Queen's Guard. She had posters on her wall showing the guards in their bright red uniforms and tall black hats. She had toy soldiers lined up on her shelf, each one standing perfectly straight. She knew all about the guards at Buckingham Palace, how they stood so still that people thought they were statues, how they marched with such perfect timing that their boots clicked together like music. Her grandfather had taken her to see the changing of the guard ceremony once 2 years ago. Lucy still remembered that day perfectly. She had stood pressed against the palace gates, her nose practically touching the golden bars, watching in complete wonder as the guards marched past. Their uniforms were so bright red they almost hurt to look at. Their movements were so precise they seemed to move as one person instead of many. From that day forward, Lucy dreamed of standing beside a real guard, of maybe even wearing one of those tall furry hats, even if just for a moment. But now, lying in a hospital bed with tubes attached to her arm, that dream seemed impossibly far away. The treatments made her feel sick and tired. Her arms were covered in bruises from all the needles. The medicine tasted terrible no matter how much juice they mixed it with. Some days she was too weak to even sit up and watch her favorite videos of the palace guards. Anne watched her daughter fade a little more each day. The bright, energetic girl who used to dance around the house pretending to march like a soldier now barely had the strength to hold her teddy bear. Lucy's smile, once so quick and easy, now appeared less and less often. She stopped asking when she could go home. She stopped talking about the guards. She just lay there staring at the ceiling, trapped in a body that no longer felt like her own. One particularly difficult night, after Lucy had finally fallen asleep following a painful treatment, Anne sat alone in the hospital cafeteria. The coffee was cold and bitter, but she held the cup just to have something warm in her hands. She thought about all the things she would do, all the promises she would make if only her daughter could be well again. That's when she remembered Lucy's dream, the guards, the palace, the wonder in her daughter's eyes that day at the gate. Anne pulled out her phone and began searching. Could she write to the palace? Was there a way to request something like this? She knew it was probably impossible. The Queen's Guard followed strict rules. They couldn't just break protocol for every sick child. But what if they could make an exception? What if there was even the smallest chance? Robert found her there an hour later, typing on her phone with tears running down her cheeks. She had drafted and deleted the message 10 times trying to find the right words. How do you explain that your child is suffering? How do you ask for help without sounding desperate even though you are? How do you capture in words what it means to see your daughter lose hope? Finally, she wrote from her heart. She explained about Lucy's condition, about the treatments, about how weak and sad their little girl had become. She wrote about Lucy's love for the Queen's Guard, about the posters on her wall and the toy soldiers on her shelf. She described that day at the palace gates 2 years ago, how Lucy's face had glowed with pure happiness. She explained that she wasn't asking for much, just maybe a photograph or a letter, anything that might remind Lucy that there was still magic in the world. Anne read the message one more time, then pressed send before she could change her mind. The email disappeared into the darkness of the internet, heading toward Buckingham Palace. She had no idea if anyone would read it. She had no idea if it would make any difference. But at least she had tried. At least she had done something besides sit helplessly and watch her daughter suffer. Back in Lucy's room, Robert sat beside their sleeping daughter. He gently brushed her hair back from her forehead. She looked so small in that hospital bed. Surrounded by machines that beeped and hummed through the night, Captain the Bear was tucked under her arm, his worn fur soft from years of hugs. On the television mounted on the wall, a documentary about the royal family played with the sound turned down low. Robert watched the guards marching across the screen and whispered a quiet prayer that somehow, some way, his daughter would smile again. 2 weeks passed slowly. Each day felt like a month. Lucy's treatments continued, and with each session, she seemed to shrink a little more into herself. The bright spark that had always made her special was dimming, and Anne could do nothing but watch it happen. The hospital had become their second home. Anne knew all the nurses by name now. She knew which vending machine had the best snacks and which elevator was fastest. She knew the pattern of the floor tiles and had counted them more times than she cared to admit during long, sleepless nights. Robert juggled work and hospital visits, arriving each evening with dark circles under his eyes and forced cheerfulness in his voice. Lucy's treatment schedule was brutal. Morning blood draws that left her arms purple and sore, medications that made her stomach hurt and her head ache. Afternoons spent connected to IV machines, watching the clear liquid drip slowly into her veins, while other children played in the ward's playroom down the hall. She was too tired to join them most days, too tired to do anything but sleep. The child in the bed next to Lucy's was discharged that week. Then another. Then another. Lucy watched them leave with their parents, carrying balloons and stuffed animals, heading home to their own beds and their own toys. She wondered if she would ever leave too. The doctors said positive things, but their eyes told a different story. This was going to be a long fight. Anne had almost forgotten about the email she had sent. Life had become so focused on the immediate needs of each day that thinking about anything else felt impossible. Get through the morning treatment. Make sure Lucy ate something. Help her to the bathroom. Change her bed sheets. Read her a story. Watch her sleep. Then do it all over again the next day. There was no room for hope about emails that probably went unread, lost in some digital pile of thousands of requests that came to the palace every week. Then, on a Thursday afternoon, everything changed. Anne was sitting in the hospital cafeteria, forcing herself to eat a sandwich she couldn't taste when her phone buzzed. She glanced at it, expecting another update from work or a message from a concerned relative. Instead, she saw an email from an address that made her heart stop. It was from Buckingham Palace. Her hand started shaking so badly she nearly dropped her phone. She read the email once, then twice, then 3 times because surely she was reading it wrong. This couldn't be real. This kind of thing didn't happen to normal people. It didn't happen to families like theirs, but there it was in clear black letters on her phone screen. Her email had not only been read, but someone had actually responded, not with a polite form letter saying thank you but no, not with a standard message expressing sympathy but offering nothing. This was a real response from a real person. The email explained that her message had been passed to the household staff, who had been deeply moved by Lucy's story. They understood that protocol was strict, and that the Queen's Guard followed rules that had been in place for centuries. However, in exceptional circumstances, small accommodations could sometimes be made. A member of the Guard, a sergeant with many years of service, had volunteered to visit Lucy at the hospital. Anne read that line again and again. Visit Lucy at the hospital. A real Queen's Guard coming to see her daughter. She wanted to scream with joy. She wanted to cry. She wanted to run upstairs and tell Lucy immediately, but she forced herself to keep reading. The email continued with details. The visit would be brief, perhaps 30 minutes. The guardsmen would come in full ceremonial uniform. They would arrange a time that worked around Lucy's treatment schedule. The palace asked for privacy regarding the visit, as they didn't want to create expectations for others in similar situations. This was a special exception, made possible by the kindness of one particular soldier who had been touched by Lucy's story. Anne sat in that cafeteria chair, tears streaming down her face while strangers walked past carrying their lunch trays. She didn't care who saw her crying. She didn't care about anything except the words on her phone screen. Someone had heard her plea. Someone had cared enough to do something impossible. She called Robert immediately. He answered on the first ring, his voice tight with worry. Had something happened? Was Lucy okay? Anne could barely speak through her tears. When she finally managed to explain, Robert went silent on the other end of the line. For a moment she thought the call had dropped. Then she heard him crying too. Grown men don't cry often, but when they do, it comes from somewhere deep and true. This was one of those moments. They decided not to tell Lucy right away. What if something went wrong? What if plans changed? What if this was all somehow a mistake? They couldn't bear to see her disappointed. Better to wait until everything was confirmed, until they knew for certain this miracle was really going to happen. The hospital staff helped coordinate everything. The head nurse, Mrs. Patterson, had worked there for 20 years and said she had never seen anything like this before. She personally ensured that Lucy's treatment schedule would allow for the visit. The hospital director got involved, making sure proper security clearances were in place. Everyone wanted to help make this happen. 3 days before the scheduled visit, Anne and Robert finally told Lucy. They sat on either side of her hospital bed holding her hands. Anne spoke slowly and carefully, watching her daughter's face as the words registered. A royal guard was coming to see her. A real one, in full uniform. He was coming specifically to meet her. Lucy's eyes went wide. She looked from her mother to her father and back again, searching their faces to see if this was some kind of joke, but they weren't smiling in that teasing way. They were smiling with tears in their eyes, the kind of smile that means something too big for words. The little girl who had barely spoken in weeks suddenly came alive. She asked a dozen questions all at once. When was he coming? What was his name? Could she touch his uniform? Could she take a picture? Could she keep the picture forever and ever? Anne and Robert answered as best they could, laughing and crying at the same time, just happy to see their daughter excited about something again. The next 3 days felt like 3 years. Lucy asked about the visit constantly. She made her parents help her practice what she would say. She wanted to make sure she got everything right, that she asked all the important questions. She talked about it so much that the other children in the ward heard about it too. And soon everyone was excited about the guardsman's visit. Lucy even started eating better. The nurses noticed the change immediately. She took her medicine without complaining. She didn't cry during the painful procedures. She was drawing strength from somewhere new, from the knowledge that something wonderful was coming, that dreams could still come true even in the darkest times. Anne watched her daughter transform over those 3 days. The light was coming back into her eyes. The smile was returning to her face. Hope, that fragile and precious thing, was taking root again in a heart that had almost given up. The morning arrived cold and bright. Autumn had painted the trees outside the hospital windows in shades of gold and orange. Lucy had barely slept the night before, too excited to close her eyes for more than a few minutes at a time. Anne had stayed awake with her, talking about nothing and everything, just enjoying the sound of her daughter's voice filled with enthusiasm again. By 9 in the morning, Lucy was already dressed in her favorite outfit. Well, as dressed as you can be when you're still connected to medical equipment. Anne had brought clothes from home, a purple dress that Lucy loved because it had pockets. The nurses helped arrange everything so Lucy could wear regular clothes over the medical tape and tubes. They even let her wear her special shoes, the ones with the little lights that blinked when she walked, even though she wouldn't be doing much walking today. The other children in the ward were excited too. Word had spread through the hospital that something special was happening. Parents and nurses spoke in hushed, eager tones. Mrs. Patterson, the head nurse, had made sure that Lucy's room was spotless. Someone had even brought in fresh flowers to brighten the space. The usual smell of antiseptic was masked by the sweet scent of roses. 10 o'clock came and went. Lucy watched the clock on the wall, her small hands clasped together in her lap. Captain the Bear sat beside her, also watching the door. Robert stood by the window, checking his watch every few minutes. Anne sat on the edge of Lucy's bed, running her fingers through her daughter's hair, which had started to thin from the treatments but was still there, still soft. Then at 10:15, there was movement in the hallway, voices, the sound of footsteps that were different from the usual hospital shuffle. These footsteps had rhythm, purpose, precision. Lucy's eyes went to the door. Anne felt her own heart hammering in her chest. Mrs. Patterson appeared first, her face glowing with excitement. She looked at Lucy and smiled the biggest smile. Then she stepped aside and everything else in the world seemed to disappear. He was tall, so tall that he had to duck slightly to enter the doorway. The red uniform was even brighter than it looked on television, the kind of red that seemed to glow from within. The gold buttons caught the light and sparkled like tiny suns. And the hat, that famous tall black hat made of real bearskin, added at least another foot to his already impressive height. He was exactly like the pictures Lucy had studied for years, except he was real, solid, standing right there in her hospital room. Sergeant William Harrison had been in the Queen's Guard for 15 years. He had stood watch at palaces and royal residences. He had marched in ceremonies attended by thousands. He had met dignitaries and celebrities, and once even helped rescue a tourist who had fainted during a summer ceremony. But walking into that hospital room and seeing Lucy's face, he later said, was the moment he understood what his uniform really meant. Lucy couldn't speak. She tried, but no words came out. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. Her eyes were so wide they seemed to take up half her face. Anne thought her daughter might actually faint from sheer shock and joy. William did something then that went against years of training. Royal Guards stand at attention. They don't move unless ordered. They certainly don't kneel. But William knelt down beside Lucy's bed, bringing himself to her level, and when he spoke, his voice was warm and gentle, nothing like the stern soldier voice people might expect. "Hello, Lucy," he said. "I've heard you're quite the expert on the Queen's Guard. I hope you don't mind me visiting in my work clothes." That broke the spell. Lucy laughed, a sound like bells that filled the room and seemed to chase away every shadow. She nodded so vigorously that Anne worried she might hurt herself. Yes, she knew about the guards. Yes, she was so happy he came. Yes, yes, yes to everything. What happened next was pure magic. William spent the next 45 minutes talking with Lucy like they were old friends. He told her stories about palace life, about the training guards go through, about funny things that happened during ceremonies. He explained why they wear the red uniforms and tall hats. He showed her the different parts of his uniform, letting her touch the gold buttons and feel the thick fabric. Lucy asked questions faster than he could answer them. Did his feet hurt from standing so long? What happens if you need to sneeze during a ceremony? Do the guards really never laugh when tourists try to make them smile? Have you ever met the Queen? What's inside the palace? Do you have a horse? Do you carry a real sword? William answered every single question with patience and humor. Yes, feet do hurt sometimes. If you need to sneeze, you turn your head slightly and do it as quietly as possible. Some tourists are very funny, but guards are trained not to react. Yes, he had seen the Queen many times. The palace has thousands of rooms. Not all guards work with horses, but he had trained with them. And yes, the sword is quite real, though very carefully maintained so it's never dangerous to anyone nearby. Then he did something even more special. He removed his bearskin cap, that tall black hat that is one of the most recognizable symbols in the world, and he placed it gently on Lucy's head. It was enormous on her, so big it nearly covered her entire face. She had to tilt her head back to see out from under it, and when she did, she was grinning so wide it looked like her face might split in two. Robert fumbled with his phone, taking pictures from every angle. Anne was crying again, but this time they were good tears, grateful tears. Mrs. Patterson stood in the doorway with other nurses, all of them wiping their eyes. Even William's eyes looked suspiciously bright. Lucy wore that hat like a crown. She sat up as straight as her tired body would allow, trying to look as official as possible. William taught her how to salute properly, showing her the exact angle of the hand, the precise position of the elbow. Lucy practiced over and over until she got it just right. Each time she did it, William saluted back with complete seriousness, as if she were a fellow guard and not a 7-year-old girl in a hospital bed. The visit lasted much longer than the planned 30 minutes. Nobody mentioned the time. Nobody wanted it to end. William seemed in no hurry to leave, and hospital staff made sure they had privacy and quiet. For almost an hour, that room was transformed from a place of sickness into a place of wonder. Other children from the ward had gathered near the doorway, peeking in with wide eyes. William noticed them and, with Lucy's permission, invited them closer. Soon there were 6 children gathered around, all listening to his stories, all taking turns trying on the hat, all learning how to salute. For those children, many of whom were also fighting serious illnesses. That hour was a gift of joy in a place usually filled with fear and pain. As the visit drew to a close, William presented Lucy with something special. From his pocket, he pulled out a small red book with the royal seal on the cover. Inside were photographs of the palace, information about the guards, and a handwritten note from William himself. The note said that Lucy was one of the bravest people he had ever met, and that true courage isn't about standing perfectly still in a fancy uniform. True courage is facing each difficult day with hope and strength, which was exactly what she was doing. The days following William's visit brought a change that amazed everyone at the hospital. Lucy was different. Not cured, the doctors were careful to emphasize that, but different in ways that medicine couldn't quite explain. She woke up earlier. She smiled more. She complained less about the treatments that still made her feel sick and tired. Something inside her had shifted, like a light that had been dimmed was now glowing bright again. Anne and Robert noticed it immediately. Their daughter talked constantly about the visit, replaying every moment in elaborate detail. She slept with the red book William had given her under her pillow. The photograph of her wearing the guardsman's hat was printed and framed, sitting on her bedside table where she could see it first thing every morning. She practiced her salute dozens of times a day, making sure she kept the form perfect, just as William had taught her. The medical staff noticed, too. Lucy was more cooperative during procedures. She took her medicine without the usual fuss. When blood had to be drawn, which she normally hated, she would straighten up and salute, pretending she was a guard standing watch. The nurses started calling her Sergeant Lucy, which made her beam with pride. Even the painful treatment seemed easier for her to bear. She had found something to focus on besides the sickness, something that made her feel strong instead of weak. But what nobody expected was that William would come back. The original visit had been presented as a one-time exception, a special moment arranged through unusual circumstances. Yet, exactly 1 week later, Mrs. Patterson appeared at Lucy's room with that same excited glow on her face. Lucy was doing a puzzle when the nurse peeked in and asked if she was available for a visitor. Lucy looked up confused. Her parents weren't due until later, and she didn't know who else would be coming to see her. Then William appeared in the doorway, once again in full ceremonial uniform, and Lucy actually squealed with delight. She couldn't believe it. He had come back. He had come back to see her again. This visit was different from the first. William seemed more relaxed, like he was visiting a friend rather than performing an official duty. He pulled up a chair and sat beside Lucy's bed, asking about her week, about her treatments, about whether she had been practicing her salute. Lucy told him everything, the words tumbling out in a rush of excitement. She showed him her puzzle and the drawings she had made of guards in red uniforms. She told him about how she had been braver during her treatments because she imagined she was a guard on duty. William listened to every word with genuine interest. Then he pulled out a surprise from a bag he had brought. Inside was a children's book about the history of the Queen's Guard, filled with colorful illustrations and fascinating facts. There was also a small flag, the kind that guards sometimes carried during special ceremonies. Lucy held these gifts like they were made of gold, her eyes shining with grateful tears. That second visit established a pattern. William began coming every Tuesday afternoon, always in full uniform, always bringing his warmth and kindness along with stories and small gifts. The palace had not officially sanctioned these regular visits. This was William's own time, his days off, spent traveling to the hospital to see a little girl who had captured his heart. His commanding officers knew about the visits and chose to look the other way, understanding that sometimes rules existed to create order, but that order should never come at the expense of compassion. The other children in the ward began to anticipate Tuesday afternoons almost as much as Lucy did. William never made it just about her. He would spend time with the other young patients too, telling stories, answering questions, letting them touch his uniform. For children trapped in hospital beds, fighting battles that no child should have to fight, those Tuesday visits became a highlight of their week. Parents would arrange to be there on Tuesdays, wanting to see their children's faces light up. Nurses would schedule breaks on Tuesday afternoons so they could stop by and listen to William's stories. Lucy's relationship with William grew into something special. He became a combination of teacher, friend, and protector. He taught her about military history, about discipline and duty, about service and sacrifice. But more importantly, he taught her about perseverance. He explained that being in the Guard wasn't about never feeling tired or scared. It was about standing your ground even when you wanted to quit. It was about getting through each day, each hour, each moment by focusing on your duty and remembering why you chose to serve in the first place. Lucy understood what he was really saying. Her duty was to fight her illness. Her service was to herself and her family. Her reason for standing strong was to have a future, to see what life had waiting for her beyond these hospital walls. William never pretended her situation was easy or simple. He never said everything would definitely be okay. But he showed her that courage wasn't about being unafraid. It was about being afraid and doing what you had to do anyway. As weeks turned into months, Lucy's condition remained serious but stable. The treatments were working, slowly but surely. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. Anne and Robert dared to hope that maybe, just maybe, their daughter would beat this thing. And through it all, William was there every Tuesday, as reliable as sunrise, bringing light into the darkest corners of their struggle. The hospital staff marveled at what was happening. They saw patients every day, watched families fight battles against diseases and disorders that had no respect for age or fairness. They were trained to provide medical care, to administer treatments and monitor vital signs. But William was providing something that couldn't be measured in blood tests or recorded on charts. He was providing hope, delivered in a bright red uniform with shiny gold buttons. Mrs. Patterson, who had been a nurse for over 2 decades, said she had never seen anything quite like it. She had witnessed many kind gestures over the years, many people going out of their way to help sick children, but this was different. This was a soldier with a demanding job and his own life and responsibilities, choosing to spend his precious free time sitting beside a hospital bed, making a sick child feel like the bravest person in the world. Robert asked William once why he kept coming back. They were sitting in the family waiting area while Lucy was undergoing a scan. William thought about the question for a long moment before answering. He said that when he first received the request to visit Lucy, he had agreed because it seemed like a kind thing to do. But after meeting her, after seeing her courage and spirit despite everything she was going through, he realized she was teaching him something important. She reminded him why he had joined the Guard in the first place, not for the ceremony or the tradition, though those were important, but to serve, to protect, to stand watch over something worth defending. And what could be more worth defending than a child's hope? That answer brought tears to Robert's eyes. He shook William's hand and thanked him, though words felt inadequate for expressing what this man was doing for their family. William just smiled and said that Lucy was thanking him enough every Tuesday with her salutes and her questions, and her determination to keep fighting. He was getting as much from these visits as he was giving, maybe even more. Winter arrived early that year, bringing cold rain and gray skies to London. Inside the hospital, though, Tuesday afternoons remained bright spots in the endless routine of treatments and waiting. Lucy's health continued its slow, uncertain progress. Some days were good, filled with energy and hope. Other days were hard when the treatments took their toll and even sitting up felt impossible. But through it all, William kept coming, as steady and reliable as the guards standing watch at the palace gates. It was during one particularly difficult week in December that William noticed Lucy seemed different. She was quieter than usual, her enthusiasm dimmed. The book he had brought lay unopened on her bed. She tried to smile when he arrived, but it didn't reach her eyes. Anne and Robert looked exhausted, the kind of tired that comes from weeks of stress and worry piling up without relief. William sat beside Lucy's bed and waited. He didn't push her to talk or try to cheer her up with stories. He just sat there, present and patient, letting her know he wasn't going anywhere. After a long silence, Lucy finally spoke, her voice small and uncertain. She asked William if he ever wanted to quit being a guard. If the standing and the rules and the difficult parts ever made him want to just walk away and do something easier. William considered the question carefully. He told her yes, there were definitely days when the job felt too hard. Days when his feet ached from standing for hours. Days when the weather was terrible and he was cold or hot and miserable. Days when he missed important family events because duty called. But he also told her about the moments that made it all worthwhile. The look on a child's face during the changing of the guard. The pride of being part of something bigger than himself. The knowledge that he was serving his country and upholding traditions that stretched back centuries. Then he told Lucy something he had never shared with anyone before. When he was younger, just starting his training, he had almost quit. The training was brutal, demanding perfection in every movement, every stance, every action. He remembered one day when he had gotten everything wrong. His instructor had been harsh, pointing out every mistake, making him repeat drills until his legs shook with exhaustion. That night, back in his quarters, William had actually started packing his bags, ready to leave in the morning and forget about becoming a guard. Lucy listened intently, forgetting her own troubles for a moment, caught up in his story. She asked what made him stay. William smiled and said it was actually something very simple. His grandfather, who had also been in the military, called him that night. It was like he somehow knew William was struggling. His grandfather told him that the things worth doing were never easy. If something came naturally and felt comfortable all the time, then you probably weren't growing or challenging yourself. The difficult moments weren't signs that you should quit. They were signs that you were doing something important. Lucy was quiet for a long moment, processing this. Then she said something that surprised everyone in the room. She said she understood because her treatments felt like that training. Every day was hard. Every day she wanted to quit. But maybe the hardness meant she was doing something important too, fighting to get better, working toward a future, standing her ground against an enemy that wanted to defeat her. William reached over and gently placed his hand over hers. He told her she was absolutely right. And more than that, she was doing something even harder than his training had been, because at least he could see progress each day, could measure his improvement in concrete ways. Her battle was different. Progress came slowly. Setbacks were common, and there was no guarantee of when it would end. That made her braver than any guard standing at any palace anywhere in the world. Something shifted in that conversation. Lucy seemed to find a new reserve of strength. The following weeks brought more difficult treatments, but she faced them with renewed determination. She started a journal, writing down her daily duty reports just like William said guards did. Each entry listed what she had accomplished that day, even if it was something small like eating all her lunch or walking to the bathroom without help. She was learning to measure progress in her own way, to celebrate victories that others might not even notice. As Christmas approached, William arrived one Tuesday with 4 other guards. Lucy's eyes went wide when she saw them all filing into her room in their magnificent red uniforms. William explained that his fellow guardsmen had heard so much about Lucy that they wanted to meet her themselves. Each guard introduced himself and spent time talking with Lucy, answering her questions, sharing their own stories. The hospital ward was transformed into something magical, filled with red uniforms and gold buttons and deep voices, speaking with kindness and respect to a little girl who probably knew more about their traditions than most people in Britain. The guards didn't just visit Lucy, they went room to room, meeting every child in the pediatric ward. Some children were too young to understand who they were. Others were too sick to do more than open their eyes and stare in wonder. But every single child received attention from these soldiers, who had better things to do on their day off than visit a hospital. Parents cried. Nurses took pictures. Even the doctors stopped their rounds to watch, marveling at this display of compassion from men trained to be stoic and unmovable. Before leaving that day, William gathered all the children who were well enough to sit up and taught them a simplified version of the Guards' March. Right, left, keeping rhythm, moving together. Some children were in wheelchairs. Others had IV poles they rolled along beside them. One little boy marched while sitting in his bed, just moving his arms in time with the others. It was messy and imperfect and absolutely beautiful. When they finished, all the guards saluted the children with complete seriousness, treating them like fellow soldiers who had earned respect through their own battles. Lucy treasured that day. She talked about it for weeks afterward, describing every detail over and over to anyone who would listen. She had photos printed of all the guards together, creating a collage that covered one entire wall beside her bed. When treatments were particularly hard, she would look at those pictures and remember that she wasn't alone in her fight. She had an army of guards standing with her in spirit, soldiers who had looked her in the eye and called her brave. Anne and Robert watched their daughter transform over those months. She was still sick. The treatments were still difficult, but she had found a way to be more than her illness. She had found purpose and pride and a reason to stand tall even when everything in her body wanted to collapse. William had given her that gift, not through grand gestures or miraculous cures, but through showing up week after week, choosing to care about a little girl who needed someone to believe in her. The hospital staff noticed something remarkable. Lucy's medical outcomes weren't necessarily better than other patients with similar conditions, but her ability to cope with treatments was exceptional. She had fewer episodes of depression and anxiety. She was more willing to try difficult therapies. She complained less about pain and discomfort. The doctors couldn't put it in their charts or prescribe it as medicine, but they all knew that William's visits were providing a kind of treatment that no pharmaceutical could match. They were giving Lucy something to fight for beyond just surviving. They were giving her a vision of strength and duty and service that made her want to become the best version of herself she could possibly be. Spring arrived with unexpected warmth, bringing blooming flowers and longer days. Lucy's condition had stabilized enough that she was spending more time at home between treatments, though she still required regular hospital visits. The Tuesday routine continued whenever she was well enough, with William adjusting his schedule to visit her either at the hospital or, occasionally, at her family's flat. These home visits felt different, more personal, as William got to see the posters on her walls and the toy guards lined up on her shelves like a small army watching over her. One Tuesday in April, William arrived at the hospital with an unusual expression on his face. There was excitement there, mixed with something that looked almost like nervousness. Lucy noticed immediately and asked what was wrong. William smiled and said nothing was wrong. In fact, something very special was being planned, but he needed to talk with her parents first to make sure it was possible. Anne and Robert joined them, curious and slightly concerned. William explained that he had been speaking with his commanding officers and with hospital administrators. Everyone had been following Lucy's progress and had been inspired by her courage. Several of the guards who had visited in December had stayed in touch, asking about her regularly. Now they wanted to do something unprecedented, something that had never been done before in the long history of the Queen's Guard. They wanted to perform a miniature changing of the guard ceremony in the hospital courtyard, specifically for Lucy and the other children in the ward. It would be a simplified version, lasting only about 15 minutes, but it would include full uniforms, proper marching, and authentic ceremony. 4 guards had volunteered to participate on their own time. The hospital director had approved the use of the courtyard. All they needed now was permission from Lucy's family, and confirmation that she would be well enough to attend. Lucy's mouth fell open. Anne's hand flew to her chest. Robert looked like someone had just told him he had won the lottery. Was this real? Could this actually happen? William assured them it was completely real. In fact, if Lucy's doctors agreed, they were planning to do it this coming Saturday, just 3 days away. The next 3 days were a whirlwind of preparation. Lucy's doctors examined her carefully and agreed she could attend, though she would need to be in a wheelchair to conserve her energy. Anne washed and ironed Lucy's purple dress. Robert arranged to take time off work. Word spread through the hospital, and suddenly dozens of families were asking if they could watch too. The hospital staff worked to ensure that every child who was well enough could have a view, whether from the courtyard or from windows overlooking it. Saturday arrived bright and clear, the kind of perfect spring day that felt like a gift. By early afternoon, the hospital courtyard was transformed. Chairs had been set up for family members. Children were positioned around the space, some in wheelchairs, others on portable beds rolled out from their rooms. Hospital staff lined the edges. Even people from nearby buildings had heard about the event and were watching from their windows. The courtyard could hold maybe 50 people comfortably, but more than 100 had found ways to witness what was about to happen. Lucy sat in her wheelchair in the front row, wearing her purple dress and the biggest smile anyone had seen on her face in months. Captain the Bear sat in her lap, also dressed for the occasion in a tiny red coat that Anne had sewn by hand. Robert stood behind Lucy's wheelchair, his hands on her shoulders. Anne knelt beside her daughter, camera ready, determined to capture every single moment. Then they arrived, 4 guards in full ceremonial uniform, marching in perfect synchronization across the courtyard. Their boots struck the pavement with precise rhythmic clicks. Their red uniforms blazed in the afternoon sun. Their tall bearskin hats added to their already impressive height. William was among them, though in formation he was indistinguishable from his fellow soldiers. They moved as one unit, each step identical, each turn executed with flawless timing. The courtyard fell completely silent. Even the smallest children stopped talking, mesmerized by what they were watching. This wasn't a video on a screen or pictures in a book. This was real, happening right in front of them. So close they could hear the fabric of the uniforms rustling and see the determination on the guards' faces. The ceremony lasted exactly 17 minutes. The guards performed a simplified changing of the watch, complete with all the traditional movements. They marched and turned and presented arms with their ceremonial rifles. They executed the famous slow march, where each step takes several seconds, requiring incredible leg strength and balance. They demonstrated the precise footwork and exact positioning that made the Queen's Guard famous around the world. It was mesmerizing, powerful, and deeply moving. Lucy watched with tears streaming down her face, not tears of sadness but of pure, overwhelming joy. She had dreamed of this moment for years, and now it was happening, more beautiful than she had ever imagined. Around her, other children watched with equal wonder. Parents wiped their eyes. Nurses forgot about their duties and just stood there, present in the moment, witnessing something they would talk about for the rest of their lives. When the ceremony concluded, the guards came to attention one final time, then did something extraordinary. Instead of marching away, they broke formation and approached the children. William came directly to Lucy, kneeling beside her wheelchair just as he had that first day months ago. But this time he wasn't alone. The 3 other guards joined him, and together, they presented Lucy with a certificate. It was official-looking, printed on heavy paper with the royal seal at the top. The certificate declared Lucy an honorary member of the Queen's Guard, recognizing her courage, determination, and fighting spirit. It was signed by all 4 guards present, and at the bottom there was another signature that made Anne gasp out loud. Someone very important at the palace had signed it too, giving official recognition to Lucy's honorary status. But that wasn't all. William reached into his jacket and pulled out something else. It was a pin, the kind that guards wore on their uniforms, small but significant. This particular pin had belonged to William himself. He had worn it throughout his service, through ceremonies and watches and countless hours of duty. Now he was giving it to Lucy, telling her that she had earned it through her own service, through standing her ground and fighting her battle with honor and courage. Lucy could barely see the pin through her tears. She held it in her shaking hands like it was the most precious thing in the world, because to her this wasn't just a piece of metal. It was a symbol of everything she had been through, everything she had survived, everything she had learned about herself over these difficult months. It was proof that she was strong, that she was brave, that she was a fighter. The other children in the courtyard received attention too. The guards spent time with each one, talking, listening, making them feel special and important. Every child got a picture with the guards. Every child got to ask questions. Every child was treated with the same respect and seriousness that the guards would show to any officer or dignitary. For children who spent most of their time feeling weak and sick, this acknowledgement of their strength was transformative. As the afternoon drew to a close and the guards prepared to leave, something spontaneous and beautiful happened. One of the children, a 6-year-old boy being treated for leukemia, suddenly stood up from his wheelchair. He was wobbly and weak, but he pulled himself to his full height and gave the guards a salute. It was shaky and imperfect, but it was real. Then another child saluted, then another. Within moments, every child who could physically manage it was saluting these soldiers who had given them such an incredible gift. The guards snapped to attention and returned the salute with absolute seriousness, holding the position for several long seconds. In that moment, the courtyard held something sacred. It wasn't about ceremony or tradition or following rules. It was about human beings recognizing strength in each other, about soldiers acknowledging that courage comes in many forms, about sick children understanding that they were warriors in their own right, fighting battles just as important as any fought on any battlefield. The story of the courtyard ceremony didn't stay within the hospital walls for long. One of the parents in attendance had recorded a short video on their phone, capturing the final moment when the children saluted the guards. They shared it on social media with a simple caption explaining what had happened and why. The video was shared first by friends, then by strangers, then by news pages and community groups. Within 48 hours, it had been viewed by millions of people across Britain and beyond. The response was overwhelming. Comments poured in from around the world. People were moved by the guards' kindness, inspired by the children's courage, and touched by the whole impossible story. Messages came from veterans who said this was what service truly meant. From parents of sick children who felt less alone, knowing others understood their struggle. From teachers who showed the video to their students as an example of compassion and strength. From ordinary people who said the story had made them cry and reminded them that goodness still existed in the world. William's phone wouldn't stop buzzing with notifications. His fellow guards were suddenly recognized everywhere they went. The hospital was flooded with calls from media organizations requesting interviews and more information. Anne and Robert found themselves approached by journalists wanting to talk about Lucy's story and William's visits. It was overwhelming and unexpected, this sudden spotlight on what had been a private journey of struggle and hope. Lucy's story appeared in newspapers and on television news programs. The image of her in her purple dress holding that certificate with tears of joy on her face became iconic. People didn't just see a sick child. They saw bravery that had been acknowledged by some of the world's most disciplined soldiers. They saw the power of kindness to transform suffering into something meaningful. They saw proof that small gestures, repeated consistently, could create miracles that medicine alone couldn't achieve. But the story's impact went far beyond just views and shares and emotional comments. Real change started happening. Donations began pouring into the hospital's research fund for rare blood disorders. The money came from everywhere, from pensioners sending £10 to businesses contributing thousands. Within 2 weeks, the fund had received more money than it typically collected in an entire year. The hospital director announced that this would allow them to expand research programs and provide better support for families dealing with similar conditions. Other hospitals reached out, asking if similar programs could be arranged. Could guards visit sick children in their facilities too? Could other military branches participate? The response from service members was immediate and enthusiastic. Soldiers, sailors, and pilots from across the country volunteered to visit children's hospitals. Some hospitals arranged for police officers and firefighters to participate as well, recognizing that children admired many kinds of heroes, not just royal guards. A foundation was established called the Lucy Initiative, dedicated to connecting hospitalized children with their heroes, whether military, sports figures, artists, or community leaders. The goal wasn't to create publicity or photo opportunities, but to provide genuine connection and inspiration to children fighting serious illnesses. William was asked to serve on the advisory board, and he agreed, knowing that Lucy's story could help countless other children find the strength she had discovered. Lucy herself was overwhelmed by the attention at first. Strangers recognized her in public. She received hundreds of letters and cards from people around the world. Packages arrived containing gifts and well wishes from places she had never heard of. It was wonderful but also exhausting, especially for a child still undergoing treatment and fighting to regain her health. Anne and Robert worked to protect her privacy, while also allowing her to appreciate the positive impact her story was having. One letter stood out among all the others. It came in a simple envelope with no return address, but the handwriting was elegant and official-looking. Inside was a short note written in careful script. It expressed admiration for Lucy's courage and thanked her for reminding people what true strength looked like. The signature at the bottom made Anne's hands shake so badly she nearly dropped the letter. It was from someone very important, someone whose name Lucy had spoken with reverence since she was old enough to understand what the Queen's Guard protected. The note was personal and genuine, clearly written specifically for Lucy, not a generic message sent to many people. Lucy read that letter over and over, barely believing it was real. She kept it in a special box along with her certificate, William's pin, and photographs from the courtyard ceremony. These items became her treasures, more valuable to her than any toy or game. They represented something beyond their physical form. They were evidence that she mattered, that her struggle had meaning, that people cared about what happened to one small girl fighting a battle most people would never see. The medical team noticed something remarkable in the months following the ceremony. Lucy's physical progress was good, in line with what they expected from her treatment protocol. But her psychological resilience was extraordinary. She dealt with setbacks better than most adult patients. She maintained a positive outlook even during the hardest days. She encouraged other children in the ward, sharing her story and her hope with kids who were struggling to find their own strength. In a way, she had become what William had been for her, a source of inspiration and courage for others facing their own battles. William continued his Tuesday visits. Though now he sometimes arrived to find reporters or well-wishers hoping to see him, he handled the attention with the same grace and humility he showed in everything else. He insisted that he wasn't special or heroic. He had simply done what anyone with a heart would do, reached out to help someone who needed it. He deflected praise and redirected attention to Lucy, to the other children fighting illnesses, to the medical staff working long hours to save lives, to the parents sacrificing everything for their children. But people recognized something that William couldn't see in himself. He had demonstrated that rules and protocols, important as they were, should never become more important than compassion. He had shown that tradition could coexist with kindness, that discipline didn't mean being cold or distant, that true strength included the courage to care openly about others. These lessons resonated with people across different cultures and backgrounds, touching something universal in the human heart. The Queen's Guard noticed the impact, too. Recruitment applications increased dramatically. Young people who might never have considered military service were inspired by William's example to think about serving others. The applications weren't from people seeking glory or adventure, but from those who saw the Guard as an opportunity to make a real difference in people's lives. The institution found itself at a crossroads, recognizing that public perception was shifting toward valuing compassion alongside discipline. Internal discussions began about how to incorporate more community engagement into Guard duties without compromising the traditions and protocols that made the institution respected worldwide. William was consulted frequently, his experience with Lucy providing a blueprint for how soldiers could serve their community in new ways while maintaining the excellence and precision that defined them. It was delicate balance, but one that many believed was not only possible, but necessary for staying relevant in a changing world. Lucy's impact extended beyond just military or medical communities. Schools used her story to teach about perseverance and courage. Youth groups discussed how to support friends facing difficult times. Churches and community centers organized fundraisers for children's hospitals. The ripple effect of one little girl's battle and one soldier's kindness spread farther than anyone could have predicted, touching lives in ways that would never be fully measured or completely understood. And through it all, Lucy kept fighting her battle one day at a time, strengthened by the knowledge that her struggle meant something, that her courage inspired others, that she was part of something bigger than just her own survival. She had become a symbol of hope, not because she was cured or because her story had a guaranteed happy ending, but because she showed that even in the darkest times, connection and compassion could light the way forward. 6 months after the courtyard ceremony, Lucy's doctors delivered news the family had barely dared to hope for. Her latest tests showed remarkable improvement. The treatments were working better than expected. Her blood counts were approaching normal ranges. She was responding so well that they could begin discussing a reduction in her treatment schedule. It wasn't a cure, and there would be years of monitoring ahead, but it was the kind of progress that transformed fear into cautious optimism. Anne cried when she heard the news. Robert had to sit down, his legs suddenly unable to support him. Lucy just smiled, a quiet, knowing smile that suggested she had believed this would happen all along. She had fought too hard, had too many people standing with her to let the illness win. She asked when she could tell William the good news, and Anne promised they would call him the moment they got home. William's reaction to the news was everything they hoped it would be. His voice cracked with emotion over the phone, and Lucy could hear the genuine joy in his words. He said he had never doubted her strength, that he knew from their first meeting she was a fighter who wouldn't give up. He told her he was proud of her, and coming from him, those words meant more than any medal or award could have. As Lucy's health continued to improve, the focus shifted from just surviving to planning for the future. She could return to school part-time. She could see friends again. She could begin to live a life that looked more normal, though she would never forget what abnormal had taught her. The hospital that had been her second home for so long became a place she visited less frequently, and each decrease in visits felt like winning a small victory. One autumn afternoon, nearly a year after that first hospital visit, William arrived at Lucy's home with a special invitation. His commanding officers had arranged something unique, something that had never been offered to a civilian before. Lucy was invited to attend an official changing of the guard ceremony at Buckingham Palace, Not as a spectator behind the gates, but with reserved seating in a place of honor, close enough to see every detail, every precise movement, every carefully maintained tradition. The day of the ceremony arrived cool and crisp, perfect weather for late October. Lucy wore a new dress, blue this time because she was feeling different than she had in her purple dress at the courtyard ceremony. She was stronger now, healthier, more confident. She didn't need a wheelchair. She could walk on her own 2 feet, stand on her own strength. Anne had styled her hair, which had grown back thicker and curlier than before. Robert wore his best suit. They were a family transformed by struggle but not broken by it. The ceremony was magnificent in a way that pictures and videos could never fully capture. The music, the precision, the sheer spectacle of dozens of guards moving in perfect synchronization was breathtaking. Lucy watched with the experienced eye of someone who knew what she was seeing, who understood the discipline required to make it look effortless. She spotted William in formation, though his face remained as expressionless as every other guard. She smiled anyway, knowing he was aware of her presence even if he couldn't acknowledge it. After the ceremony concluded and the tourists began to disperse, William broke from formation one last time. He approached Lucy and her family still in full uniform, drawing curious stares from people who wondered why a Queen's Guard was talking to this ordinary-looking family. But they weren't ordinary, not really. They had walked through fire together and emerged changed but intact. William reached into his jacket and pulled out a small box. Inside was his own service pin, the one he had been wearing throughout his career with the Queen's Guard. It was polished to a brilliant shine, catching the afternoon light like a tiny star. He told Lucy that she had earned this properly now, not just through fighting her illness, but through inspiring others to be braver and kinder. He said he would be honored if she would accept it, not as a gift, but as recognition from one soldier to another. Lucy took the pin with trembling hands. She understood the weight of this gesture, knew that William was giving her something that represented years of service and dedication. She tried to thank him, but words felt insufficient, so instead she stood as straight as she could, raised her hand in the proper position she had practiced hundreds of times, and gave William the best salute she had ever performed. William returned the salute with absolute seriousness, holding it for several long seconds. Around them, tourists stopped and stared, pulling out cameras to capture this unusual moment. But William and Lucy barely noticed. They were in their own world, two people who had found each other across impossible circumstances, and had changed each other's lives in ways that would echo forward for years to come. As they prepared to leave the palace grounds, Lucy looked back at the guards standing watch. She thought about all the months of struggle, all the painful treatments and scary moments and days when hope felt impossible to find. She thought about William's Tuesday visits and the courtyard ceremony, and all the ways people had shown up for her when she needed them most. She thought about the letters from strangers and the donations to the hospital, and the ripple effects of kindness spreading out in ways no one could fully track. She realized something important then. Her illness had been terrible, something she wouldn't wish on anyone, but it had also taught her things she might never have learned otherwise. About courage that doesn't look like fearlessness but like getting up every day even when you're afraid. About strength that comes from connection rather than isolation. About how much difference one person can make by simply choosing to care. William walked them to their car, still in uniform, still drawing attention. Before they drove away, he knelt down one last time to Lucy's level. He told her that their friendship hadn't ended just because she was getting better. He would still be checking in, still be available if she ever needed to talk or just wanted to share good news. He wasn't disappearing from her life. They had formed a bond that went beyond the circumstances that created it. Lucy hugged him tightly, not caring that his uniform was stiff and formal and not really meant for hugging. William hugged her back, and people nearby saw this disciplined soldier with tears in his eyes, openly emotional about saying goodbye to a little girl who had taught him what service really meant. As they drove away from Buckingham Palace, Lucy clutched the pin in her hand and watched William through the back window until he disappeared from view. She knew she would see him again. She knew this wasn't an ending but a new beginning. She had survived something terrible and had come out the other side with gifts she hadn't expected. Confidence, resilience, an understanding of her own strength, and a friendship with a royal guard who had shown her that sometimes the most important thing you can do is simply show up for someone who needs you. Years would pass, and Lucy would grow up carrying these lessons with her. She would face new challenges and overcome them. Drawing on the reserves of courage she had discovered during her illness, she would help others who were struggling, passing forward the kindness that had been shown to her. She would tell her story to people who needed to hear it, who needed to know that darkness doesn't last forever, that hope can be found in unexpected places, that human connection is stronger than any disease. William would continue his service with the Queen's Guard, eventually rising through the ranks and becoming known not just for his precision and discipline, but for his compassion and humanity. He would think of Lucy often, remembering how one decision to visit a sick child had changed his understanding of what it meant to be a soldier. He would encourage younger guards to find ways to serve their community beyond just standing watch, to remember that their uniform represented not just tradition, but responsibility to care for those who needed protecting. And somewhere in London, in a frame on Lucy's wall, hung a photograph from that day at the palace. Lucy in her blue dress, William in his red uniform, both of them saluting each other with respect and love. Below the photo, mounted on a small cushion, was the pin William had given her. She looked at it every morning, remembering that she was brave, that she was strong, that she had faced down darkness and had won. The story of the royal guard who bent the rules for a sick child had touched everyone's hearts, not because it was a fairy tale with a perfect ending, but because it was real. It was true. It was proof that goodness existed, that people cared, that one person choosing compassion could create ripples that spread farther than anyone could imagine. And in a world that often felt cold and hard and uncaring, that proof mattered more than anything.